My dear friend, there is a deep quiet surrounding you right now that nobody else can hear. Not the kind of silence that comes from being all by yourself, but the subtle kind that arrives right before destiny starts to speak. You have been feeling this strange shift lately, haven't you? That unexpected pull deep inside your chest. Those random moments when your heart suddenly feels remarkably heavy without any obvious reason. Memories coming back to you at the most unexpected hours of the day and night. The persistent feeling that someone, somewhere, is thinking about you with an intensity they can no longer push aside. Something meaningful is happening just beneath the surface of your daily life. Tonight your soul was guided to this exact message for a real reason, because the spirit connected to yours has reached a true breaking point. They miss you far more deeply than they know how to put into words. What you do not fully realize yet is that their long silence was never proof that they stopped caring about you. It was driven by fear, it was confusion, it was bad timing, it was unhealed wounds. They simply did not understand themselves or their own hearts back then. Yet even now, during those quiet moments when the busy world slows down, your energy crashes directly into theirs, like heavy waves moving under a hidden moon. That is precisely why your spirit has felt so restless lately. That is why certain songs suddenly sound completely different to your ears. That is why familiar places carry such unexpected emotional weight. That is why your inner intuition keeps whispering that a major change is coming. Because something truly is coming, and the conversation moving toward you in the future will not be ordinary. It will shake something deep inside both of you. Before that moment arrives, there are important truths your heart needs to process. If this message had reached you too early in your journey, you might have easily brushed it off. If it had arrived too late, your heart might have already closed its door forever. The person your soul keeps returning to has been secretly fighting powerful emotions they can no longer outrun. They tried distracting themselves with everyday tasks. They tried convincing themselves they were doing fine on their own. They buried their thoughts in daily routines, heavy responsibilities, casual conversations, and constant movement. Yet somehow, your memory kept returning quietly and powerfully without an invitation. Not because you are trying to control them, and not because you place some magical spell over their mind, but because certain rare connections leave permanent fingerprints on the human soul. Lately, your absence has become far too loud for them to ignore. There is something important they have needed to say to you for a very long time, something they rehearsed repeatedly in private moments, words they carefully built inside their mind but never had the courage to release out loud. It was not because their feelings were weak or fading. It was because those feelings were overwhelmingly strong, strong enough to expose everything they worked so hard to hide from the world. True vulnerability has always frightened them much more than sleepless nights ever could. They would much rather carry heavy emotions all alone than risk revealing how deeply they actually feel. But something fundamental has been shifting inside them recently. Slowly, quietly, and almost invisibly, the emotional walls they built to protect themselves no longer feel sturdy. The distance they once used for protection no longer feels safe or comforting. The silence that once felt convenient now feels completely unbearable to carry. Perhaps that explains why your own emotions have been so intense recently. You might have experienced sudden sadness, unexpected memories, or sudden waves of feeling appearing out of nowhere without warning. You may have thought it was just a strange coincidence or simple nostalgia, but there is much more happening behind the scenes than you realize. When two souls remain deeply linked, the heart frequently senses movement long before the conscious mind understands what is happening. Something is shifting, and neither of you can stop this process anymore. What makes this bond so powerful is that the long separation between you was never a form of punishment. It was a necessary period of preparation. I know there were painful nights when you questioned your own self-worth, Moments when you wondered why someone who felt so deeply tied to your spirit could suddenly disappear into complete silence. You replayed old conversations over and over. You searched endlessly for answers. You carried heavy questions that nobody around you could answer. Yet what felt like personal rejection usually had very little to do with your actual value as a person. They were fighting internal battles within themselves, dealing with deep fear, poor timing, and heavy emotions they were not ready to face. Because they could not process those feelings, they stepped away. Stepping away from those uncomfortable emotions unfortunately meant stepping away from you too. For a long while, they convinced themselves that keeping their distance would fix everything. They truly believed that time would naturally weaken the bond, and that eventually they would stop thinking about you, stop missing you, and stop feeling your presence. But the exact opposite happened instead. Distance ended up bringing clear perspective. Silence brought sudden realizations. Absence created a deep emotional understanding. The further away they tried to run, the more aware of their true feelings they became. Now they are beginning to see something that can no longer be pushed aside. Some unique people enter your life and permanently transform your emotional world, not through grand dramatic gestures or perfect timing, but simply through who they are. You became one of those rare people to them. You are the benchmark they compare everyone else to, even if they do not say it out loud. Your absence still echoes through their ordinary moments, like a song playing nearby, a familiar scent in the air, a specific time of night, or a random memory floating up from nowhere. Every single time it happens, they are hit with the same deep longing. It is the kind of longing that arrives without warning and refuses to leave, keeping them awake at night as they look into the dark and wonder if they waited too long, or if they lost someone they were never meant to let go of. Lately, those heavy thoughts have grown much stronger because they are standing at an emotional crossroads. One path leads back into their old safe silence, while the other leads toward honesty, truth, and finally speaking what has been kept hidden for so long. The choice standing right in front of them is becoming impossible to run away from. The closer they get to making that choice, the stronger your presence feels inside their heart. That is why your intuition feels so different these days. That is why your spirit keeps sensing movement around you, because deep down, a part of you already knows that this story is far from over. The chapter that seemed completely closed was actually just paused. Somewhere tonight, while you continue living your daily life, healing, growing, and becoming stronger than you even realize, someone else is holding your name inside their heart with incredible intensity. They may not fully comprehend it all yet, nor do they know exactly what tomorrow will bring, but one thing has become undeniably clear to them: the quiet period is coming to an end, and after all this time, something meaningful is getting ready to speak again. The hidden truth behind all of this is that your separation was never meant to destroy the connection. It was meant to highlight its true value. Some people only learn to appreciate a presence after they are forced to live through its complete absence. Your absence taught them valuable lessons that your physical presence never could have shown them. It taught them what truly matters in life, what remains when everything else falls away, and which emotions are real versus which ones are just temporary. No matter how hard they tried to move forward without facing those realities, the truth kept catching up with them. Now they are standing right on the edge of a major decision, one that requires genuine courage and asks them to be emotionally honest in a way they have never attempted before. As that moment gets closer, their spirit grows more restless, because they already know deep down that there are words that can no longer remain unspoken, feelings that can no longer be hidden away, and a soul connection that simply refuses to fade out. What happens next is the part that neither of you could have fully grasped at the very beginning of this journey. There was a time when this bond felt almost impossible to explain, when the sheer size of the emotions felt much bigger than the actual circumstances you were living in. Both of you were struggling to make sense of something your hearts recognized long before your logical minds could keep up. That is why everything felt so incredibly intense from the start. It was not because the relationship was flawless, or because every single moment was easy, but because it carried essential growth that neither of you could avoid forever. Lately, a quiet transformation has been taking place within them. It is not happening all at once, or in a loud, dramatic way, but rather slowly and steadily, the exact same way the quiet dawn creeps into the morning sky, long before anyone notices the light changing. There are frequent moments now when they pause right in the middle of their everyday routine, and suddenly think of you with a wave of emotion so strong it takes them completely off guard. A familiar song comes on the radio, a specific location reminds them of a past conversation, or a clear memory resurfaces out of nowhere. For a few brief seconds, everything else in their world just fades into the background. Even when they are surrounded by busy crowds, buried in work responsibilities, or focusing on completely unrelated tasks, your presence still finds a way into their mind. It does not happen because they consciously invite it in, but because it arrives naturally on its own authority. That constant occurrence has become far too strong for them to keep sweeping under the rug. For a very long time, they maintained the belief that they could simply keep moving forward with their life without ever directly addressing what they felt for you. They held on to the hope that enough passing time would eventually wash away the connection, that physical distance would dilute the feeling, and that new experiences would carry them off to a completely different chapter. But every single attempt to walk away emotionally ended up bringing them right back to the exact same realization: you still matter to them, far more than they ever anticipated, far more than they planned for, and far more than they were ever comfortable admitting to themselves. That powerful realization has been steadily changing them from the inside out, softening their armor and reframing how they view their past, present, and future. You see, many people in this world are afraid of losing love, but there are others who are deeply terrified of actually finding it. Real love always asks tough questions that simple comfort never dares to ask. It openly demands total honesty, real vulnerability, and immense personal courage. Standing up with that kind of courage can feel incredibly daunting for someone who spent years building walls. Yet as time keeps moving forward, staying behind those walls has become far more painful for them than taking the risk to step out. They are realizing that the safety they thought they were preserving in silence was actually just a lonely cage. The heart cannot stay in hiding forever when it has already recognized its home in someone else. Everything that was put on hold is slowly beginning to unfreeze, and the path forward is finally becoming clear. When someone has spent years building high walls around their heart to protect themselves from pain, they naturally believe certain hidden parts of their spirit will stay buried forever. They carry old fears, past disappointments, and deep emotional wounds, learning to carefully mask those vulnerable pieces behind an appearance of outer strength. They never truly intended to share those quiet places with anyone else in this world. Yet somehow, your simple presence kept gently reaching into those exact protected spaces without any forceful effort or pressure, simply because of who you are at your core. That subtle exposure frightened them much more than they were ever willing to admit out loud, because when someone genuinely sees right through your defenses and recognizes your true self, it becomes entirely impossible to keep pretending. The heavy masks they wore suddenly became far too exhausting to carry, the emotional walls became nearly impossible to maintain, and the distance they relied on for protection stopped feeling safe. Eventually, a person reaches an absolute breaking point where being completely honest with themselves becomes much easier than staying in endless avoidance. That is precisely where they are standing right now, frozen directly between fear and truth, caught between keeping quiet and speaking out, and balancing between who they used to be and who they are slowly becoming. The strange thing about their current journey is that they are starting to notice unmistakable signs appearing all around them every day. These are not necessarily big or dramatic occurrences, but rather small, quiet, deeply meaningful moments that might seem completely ordinary to anyone else, but feel impossible for them to ignore. They find themselves unexpectedly coming across conversations about deep love, experiencing sudden memories that surface at the exact right second, waking up from intense dreams that linger in their mind for hours, or carrying a powerful intuition they simply cannot explain to anyone. At first they tried to brush off these moments as plain coincidences, but as time went on they began to notice just how frequently these signs were occurring in their daily life, until pretending not to see them was no longer an option. Every single indicator keeps pointing them right back in the same direction toward you, and that realization has become a reality they can no longer run away from or push aside. There is another profound truth that is only now starting to dawn on them with full clarity. They do not just miss your physical presence in their daily life, they deeply miss the person they were whenever they were around you. They miss the version of themselves that naturally emerged when you were nearby, the version that felt genuinely hopeful about the future, open to connection, fully alive, and willing to believe that life still held unexpected possibilities. That is what makes this emotional realization so overwhelmingly powerful, because people often assume they just miss another human being, when in reality, they miss who they became whenever they were in that person's light. Lately, they have been constantly remembering that specific version of themselves, the one who laughed much more easily, felt things deeply, and dreamed without limits while connected to your spirit. That persistent memory has become impossible for them to quiet down, especially during the quietest hours of the night when all daily distractions fade away and the surrounding world grows still. When everything around them goes quiet, the inner voice of the heart grows much louder, making your physical absence feel almost unbearable for them to carry alone. That is why their internal emotions have intensified so dramatically in recent weeks, why their wandering thoughts constantly return to your memory, and why keeping this emotional distance no longer feels sustainable for their spirit. For a very long time they truly believed that keeping silent was keeping them safe from harm. Now they are finally coming to understand that their silence was hurting them all along, because every single feeling left unspoken continues to expand underground. Every truth avoided continues to wait patiently, and every emotion buried deep within continues searching for a way back into the light. There is one specific, undeniable truth they can no longer escape from, no matter how hard they try. They never actually stopped caring about you. Perhaps they tried their very best to move past it. Perhaps they convinced themselves that they had successfully moved on. Or perhaps they desperately wanted to believe that the bond was gone forever. But the human heart possesses its own persistent memory, and theirs remembers absolutely everything. It remembers the long conversations, the genuine laughter, the deep natural connection, and those small everyday moments that seemed insignificant at the time, but grew into profound memories later on. It remembers all the things they wished they had explained, and the vital words they deeply regret holding back. All of those unsaid thoughts remain completely intact within them. Recently, those vivid memories have grown far stronger than their old excuses, far stronger than their personal fears, and far stronger than the comforting stories they once told themselves about why staying quiet was the easier path to take. Something deep inside their mind is beginning to realize that precious opportunities do not wait around forever, that rare soul connections do not always present themselves a second time, and that people will not remain available indefinitely. For the very first time in a long while, they are allowing themselves to confront a scary possibility they avoided for years. What if letting you walk out of their life turns out to be the absolute biggest regret of their entire existence? That single realization has a way of permanently changing a person from the inside out. Some major life lessons arrive very softly over time, while others hit like a sudden bolt of lightning. This particular truth has been slowly building inside them day by day, growing heavier with every passing moment until it now demands their absolute attention, complete honesty, and real movement forward. That is why the subtle energy surrounding this entire situation feels so different lately. Because the long season of waiting is finally shifting, the persistent silence is breaking, and the emotional gap between you is beginning to shrink. The universe often becomes strangely quiet right before a massive transformation takes place, and lately there has been a distinct stillness surrounding this bond. It is not an empty or dead quiet, but rather a focused silence of deep preparation, almost as if life itself is holding its breath while something extremely important gathers strength quietly behind the scenes. You might not see the physical proof with your eyes just yet, and you may not completely understand every detail of how it will unfold, but your spirit can already feel the shift taking place. Deep down inside, a quiet part of you already recognizes that movement has officially begun. Somewhere tonight, while you continue focus on your own personal journey, healing, and walking your path forward, someone else is standing face to face with intense emotions they can no longer ignore or deny. They are coming to see that unspoken truths only become heavier the longer they are kept hidden, and the truth they carry about their feelings for you has become remarkably heavy to carry alone. There is one major detail they have kept completely hidden from everyone around them. They have not admitted it to their closest friends. They have not mentioned it to their family members, and they have barely even allowed themselves to admit it in their own private thoughts. Admitting it out loud would force them to directly confront every single emotion they spent years trying to run away from. It would force them to acknowledge that your initial connection permanently changed who they are as a person, not just as a temporary phase for a few weeks, but in a lasting way that continues to influence their world every day. There are frequent moments now when they catch themselves blankly staring off into space, entirely lost in thoughts of you without even realizing it happened. A memory of you will arrive so suddenly that it completely interrupts whatever task they were working on. Whether it is a simple detail from the past, a familiar facial expression, or an old conversation they replay endlessly in their mind. What felt like an ordinary interaction at the time now feels like an unforgettable milestone in their life, carrying the exact same message every time it resurfaces. You mattered infinitely more to them than they ever allowed themselves to show. For a long stretch of time, they mistakenly believed they could easily control these complex feelings, thinking they could neatly file them away and store them somewhere out of reach. But real human emotions do not operate like that, especially when those feelings are tied to a deep soul connection. The harder they tried to push those emotions down into the dark, the stronger and more stubborn those feelings grew. The further they tried to walk away from you, the more they found themselves turning around to look back. The more they tried to convince everyone, including themselves, that they were doing completely fine, the less believable that narrative became, because deep down, they knew that something truly significant remained unfinished between you two. Unfinished story chapters always find a way of coming back around until they are resolved. That is why this connection keeps resurfacing in your mind, and why your inner spirit keeps sensing a subtle movement, because the overarching story never actually came to an end. It simply took a necessary break while both of you evolved into the people you needed to become. There were crucial hidden lessons buried inside that painful period of distance, lessons that neither of you could have ever truly absorbed while standing right beside each other. You were busy learning how to fiercely protect your own inner peace, how to stop frantically searching for answers, and how to stand grounded in your own worth even when your heart felt completely uncertain about the future. Meanwhile, they were off learning an entirely different set of heavy spiritual lessons on their own end. They were forced to learn what true absence actually feels like, what quiet regret does to a person, what relentless longing feels like in the middle of the night, and most importantly, what it feels like to accidentally lose someone who genuinely mattered to their soul. Certain profound truths can only be fully understood after something precious is taken away, and that hard lesson transformed their perspective completely. There are many quiet nights now when they seriously weigh the idea of reaching out to you. They do not think about doing it in a casual or reckless way, but with deep intent and care. They lie awake imagining how that potential conversation would go, hearing the actual sound of your voice again, and feeling the incredible relief that would come with finally sharing these heavy burdens instead of carrying them in total isolation. But almost immediately, internal fear creeps back in to stall them, because fear always shows up right before real courage is born. That fear whispers anxious questions into their mind, making them wonder if far too much time has passed between you, if you have already moved on with your life, if you no longer feel that special spark, or if they permanently damaged the relationship beyond repair. Those haunting questions have delayed their actions far longer than you could ever imagine. Yet despite those deep insecurities, something much stronger has started pushing back against their internal fear. And that force is the truth. Truth always grows impossibly loud when it has been ignored for too long, and their personal truth is becoming impossible to sidestep any further. There is a specific reason why this current period feels so heavy and significant. They recently underwent a quiet internal realization that completely shifted their view on everything. Some dramatic event, but happened silently during an ordinary moment, which is how the most important shifts usually occur. Perhaps they saw something random that instantly brought your face to mind, perhaps a certain song played, or perhaps they found themselves subtly comparing a new person to you without even intending to do so. Whatever small moment triggered it, the core result was identical. They suddenly realized that nobody else has ever come close to replacing your unique place in their life. Life kept moving forward. Long days turned into months, and new experiences came and went. Yet your exact place inside their heart remained entirely untouched by anyone else. That realization thoroughly terrified them because it made everything impossibly real in an instant. There was no more room left for pretending, no more room for distractions, and no more room for convenient excuses. There was only bare truth left standing. Truth can feel incredibly overwhelming to a person who has spent their entire life running away from emotional depth. That fundamental fear is the exact reason why they may have seemed so cold or emotionally distant at various points in the past. It was never because they felt nothing for you. It was because they were feeling far too much for their mind to process. People frequently assume that silence is a clear sign of complete indifference, but sometimes silence means the exact opposite. Sometimes silence is simply what happens when a person's inner emotions grow much larger than their capacity to express them. That is precisely what occurred in this situation. The core feelings never faded away for a single second. The proper words simply failed to arrive in time. But now, those unspoken words are drawing closer to the surface than they have ever been before, driven by an intense internal pressure that keeps building day by day. Every single memory, every quiet reminder, every sleepless night spent looking at the ceiling, and every private moment spent wondering how you are doing is all building toward a major turning point that neither of you will be able to ignore.